well and true girlfriends without benefits.
Fashion?
What's the word?
Fashion.
Fashion. Yeah. Thank you. We left you hanging. I also left you hanging on the word fashion.
A lot of anticipation.
Exactly. I was like, I'm so excited that we're going right back into it that I just couldn't remember English words.
Happens to the best of us.
With that being said, Jade, want to chat about moving the moon?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, just like, I think that I was really just seeing how powerful it was, what you were doing, the work that you were doing, feeling that very much. And I knew his heart just needed to be open. And I knew how much and how hard it was for him to express his feelings, his true feelings. And there was a lot of mother wounds in his chart. And the moon represents the mother in your chart. And his moon is in the 12th house, which is, and so is mine. So I really resonate and could empathize with him from the very first time I met him. And Cass looked at me at one point in the ceremony, and we had a print of his chart sitting on the table. And she said, I'm going to need you to move that moon from here to here. And she points to, she's like, below this line. Did you even know what you were asking?
I was told to ask it. I mean,
okay.
I know enough to be I know enough to be dangerous with every single thing that's happening in ceremony. That is my job.
I know, but you don't like, I knew that you didn't know exactly what you were asking. And so that's why I'm like, do you know? That's why it was so powerful. Cause I'm like, that's actually the perfect thing to ask. Like if he could move the energy of his emotional body and his mother wound from that elusive 12th house that just gets wrapped in pain and like confusion and move it into the first house of self, and proclaiming a person with their moon in the first house has zero problems stating their emotional state and asking for what they need. So it was actually the perfect thing for him to have. Like if I could do anything, I would want that for him. And so Cass looks at me, and I'm with the medicine, right? So there's a thing that happens in your brain where it's just a little bit blurrier. For me, it is anyway, in a good way. And Cass is like, I'm going to need you to move his moon from this to below this line to his first house. And I was like, so many things went through my mind. Like, well, yeah, that's perfect. And how do you know to ask that? And all that could come out of my mouth was like, do you know what you're asking me to do?
Are you sure? And I was like, Jade, it's the only way.
So she said, Jade, it's the only way. And I was like, okay, because I've been told, a few times that I can move people's planets, and it's something that I'm still like learning to believe, right?
So I'm gonna just make
in your cognitive.
I'm just gonna make you rephrase that right here on the podcast.
Correct. The way I said it.
Yes. Because I've been told I've been told that I can do shamanic extractions. It has been stated before.
No. I can move.
I can move planets. And I couldn't have thought of a better movement than that myself. So yeah. So that was like mind blowing, right? and
then after that, Jade got her drumming wings.
Yeah, tell that part.
No, hold on. No. Before we move on, you told us what came out of your mouth and what Cass responded to you with, but then what did you do?
She moved the fucking moon.
Yeah. So I literally just stood over him, and I think it happened even before I said, do you know what you're asking me to do? Are you sure? it happened in that second that she said the words. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Like as soon as she said it and she pointed to it on his chart, I like just felt it move down. And then she's like, it's the only way. And it's like a mind, body, soul thing. It's not like, let me do this. It's like, and so it shall be. It is. It has to be. It's the only way for him to find healing in this moment. So it was like that instantaneous.
And it was like a closed chapter instantaneously. We're like,
Yeah.
okay, on to the next thing. Thanks for
Yeah.
moving the moon, Jade.
Yeah, like that.
It's almost like scalpel, like she's
Yeah.
in surgery and
Yeah.
she like needed something, and then you
Yeah.
just handed it to her as she asked for it, and then
That's
it was
exactly
done.
what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved right. So that was an interesting wave because the wave didn't ever come down. And I was like, well, I'm going to take advantage of this because I love a BOGO. Like, I love not having to do the full crest up. I'm like, if we're already up, we can just play in the up. Like, I'm good with that. And at that point too, like you and Melanie were both like, your energy was still good. You guys were still clear. You were like, I just fucking moved a planet. So let's fucking go. So I was like, great. So while we're in this, I'm like, Melanie, okay, he's still good to go. He's still on a whole nother celestial plane. His moon is now moved.
And by the way, inquiring minds will want to know, like, what is he doing? Like, what's happening? And
Physically.
yeah. Yeah, what's happening to him physically? What does it look like from the outside? What was happening to him internally was a whole different story, but externally, he was just prone, right? Just
he was at this point, he was in a fetal position.
And he was like hugging himself.
He was hugging his leaf. He was fully crystal gridded.
Yes.
And yeah, and then just you actually noticed this. I didn't notice this, but you said he was like really like, you know, when you're doing, you said do like a muscle massage.
Yes. So his eyes were closed. Cass was not physically touching his body, but she was above him, working on him and moving the bowls and sounding the bowls, etc., and moving her hands. And I could see him reacting to her where her hands were and where she was pointing her energy as if he were getting a physical massage. And there was no way for him to know what was happening because he had the his hood over his eyes, his blanket over his face.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, really like, wow, this is crazy. Like, this is, yeah, it was pretty powerful. And because I think I'll also say, because I was on the medicine, because we've recognized this will probably, well, this was the case for John anyway. My role for John was, I was very tapped into how he was feeling physically, which is not really a place I wanted to be. He kind of bothered me in some of his toxic masculine traits, but despite those things, I loved him, you know, and I wanted the best for his humanity. And so that just made me so tapped into how he was feeling physically. I felt protective, kind of motherly, but I was also tapped into what Cass needed. So that was kind of my role in that space.
Yeah.
So
now let's get into
we're all the way up. We're still up.
So we're all
Cass has some work. Cass has some work to do. So
I asked Melanie to, she has, her drum is a little less bassy than mine. So I had her do kind of a heartbeat-ish thing. Cause I was like, oh, I know where we're going. We're finally going to get to womb healing. Like, let's fucking go. This is where I wanted to start. I was like, apparently we needed to move his moon first. It's fine. So I have Melanie drumming and I was like, oh, I need a little bit more bass. I need a little bit more drum. So I'm like, Jade, grab the drum. And Jade like grabs the drum. And it was kind of
I look like a deer in the headlights. First,
it was like fish out of water. You're like,
I don't know how to drum. And she's like, drum. And I literally hit the drum and I like, it's a very powerful drum.
The first couple beats, I was like, oh, fuck. What did you just ask me to do, Spirit? Like, are you sure you want to give Jade the keys to this car?
Because Cass couldn't do it herself because she was playing the sound.
Yeah,
the sound bowls.
She was doing the sound bowls and she was moving his energy around with her hands. She needed both of her hands and her feet and her.
I at one point did try to drum with my feet, but that's a whole different conversation.
And so she needed me to be the bass, right? Which is like, if you're off in that measure, like it's bad, not a good thing.
It was bad for a few seconds.
And for a few seconds, I was just myself drumming, which isn't going to work. And then Cass was given the word for me.
Yep, which was
thunder. She's like, be thunder.
Now, about 3 weeks beforehand, you had pulled for, the team, and like, what was the card for the month, and you had gotten thunder, and the words actually fit almost perfectly to what we were doing.
The words of the card thunder fit perfectly for what we were doing. They also applied to Florida just a few weeks before that. Like this the cards that I pull at the beginning of the month always manifest themselves in very powerful ways. So this
from about the 20th to the 30th, the first 20 days are basically.
That's true. Oftentimes the first 20 days, I'm like, why did I pull this card this month? And then it comes to fruition. But yeah, as soon as she said that, be thunder, it's almost like, well, I went away then, and I was able to drop into that space past your human.
I don't even know how long it was. I mean, it took a while to like get what I was trying to do to connect with him. And that's when I screamed out, I need Kaylin, because I was trying to sound bowl, crystal grid, move energy, and then open the doors.
She wanted those doors open so that bad juju could go away.
So I was like,
yeah, she was literally like sweeping it out, that movie Practical Magic. Do you guys know that movie? The listeners will know. Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock. And at the end of one of their seances, they open the doors and like sweep the bad spirits out. That's literally what you were doing.
I don't watch any movies.
You have to watch Practical Magic. It's so good.
Note to self.
So
I do love Sandra Bullock.
Yeah, it's a really good movie though. It really is. You guys will love it. It's all about witches. So she was doing that, and I was just able to keep the bass going, and then I was so in it that she had to make me stop. She's like, okay, like she had to like physically like touch my hands to remind
give you permission to be done.
Like, give me permission.
Because Melanie stopped, and like normally when Melanie and I are drumming together, Melanie and I will look and make eye contact, and we just know when either she ends or I end, and it ends beautifully.
I'm just, my eyes are closed. I'm like, I will do this forever.
She was feeling the thunder.
She's like, I am thunder. So that was then we finally let him come down from that. And then at that point I recognized like, holy shit, our energy is kind of like, because it was like 4 or 5 really big crests at that point. And I was like, and we did just come off of like a double shift, if you will. So I was like, okay, now it's time to like focus back on us. So that was my dance party. And
that was my favorite part of the whole night.
Yeah, that was my favorite part,
dance party.
What is the first song that you played?
Levitating.
So
Dua
Lipa and a baby.
We'll have to link that. You don't imagine that that's a song that one would play during a ceremony, plant medicine ceremony, but it was actually the most perfect song. And also note that even though Cass had taken the medicine, she doesn't feel it. And Melanie and I were still, with the medicine. And so it doesn't always feel like getting up and dancing is like what you're supposed to do. But just like when we were in the ayahuasca ceremony, when I was in Costa Rica, the shamans were kind of leading us to do that as the crest was kind of coming down. That's what you do, like get back in your body. And so she started playing the music, and Cass just started leaping around, and before you knew it, we were all standing up and dancing, and we were holding hands in a circle around. So John is still on the floor, prone on the floor, and we are literally in a circle dancing and laughing and hugging each other, circling around him.
He pulled up his hood and was like, just like looked up, smiled, and then pulled his hood right back down and went right back in.
Yeah, he kept looking up at us with big eyes like, wow, they're just like all around me. And we were calling in his divine feminine and giving permission for that toxic masculine to go away. And it was and it wasn't even toxic masculine. I want to like pause there. It was actually wounded masculine. It was just so hurt. Yeah.
And like there was a couple strings of toxicness, but honestly, most of it was from a wounded masculine place.
Yeah. I
Which
hear
so
that.
often, quote, toxic masculinity in its truest sense is from a wounded masculine.
Yeah. Well, it feels toxic when it's coming at
Oh,
you.
100%. It's disgusting.
But yeah, that was
And then I played my favorite song, which is Sweet Talker.
We'll link it in the show notes.
We'll link it in the show notes, but this particular client is really good with his words, and they get, as Jade said during prep, they get him in trouble and they can get him out of trouble. So basically the words in this song, which I don't know what compelled me to play it other than, spirit and that being so good, was, "You're a sweet talker, everything you say is a lie." So we were dancing to that too. Again, him not realizing the words or anything of that nature, but all of us knowing full well why that song was playing.
And just smiling and laughing. And it was like, it's hard to explain, but we all three had so much compassion and love for John in that moment. And we're just giving it to him, right? And he knew that. And it was a very empowering and powerful, and it was beautiful.
So the next chapter is called Who's in Charge?
Yes.
Love it. That was one of the only things he said with his words over and over and over.
Yeah. It started really after those 5 big crests.
Yep.
I found kind of really funny because I was like, who do you think was just in charge, asshole? Like, what do you think just happened? But it was like this. I think once he was starting to kind of come down off the peak after those 5 crests, he was starting to become a little bit more aware, a little bit more cognitive. And it was, he saw us all dancing and having fun. He was like, who's in charge of this thing? Like, what's going on? Who's in charge?
Who's in charge over and over again?
And why was he asking that? Do you know?
I asked him if he was being a Karen and wanted to talk to a manager.
That was probably something like it. But also just his need to categorize and organize and know what's going on. He kept asking Melanie what her role was. Like, he wants to know, like, what's everyone doing? Like, who's in charge?
Like, why are you here?
Why are you here? Yeah. I mean,
why are you here?
He was still sitting with the medicine pretty hard and starting to talk a lot more. And I didn't at that point really, I wanted to stay in my sweet little bubble of healing, and I was done. I was ready to go home.
She was. It was really cute because that was one of my favorite parts is we're sitting there and, he's still, I don't know, probably 2 to 3 hours away from done. And Jade's like, if you need space, we can leave him. Like, we're not, like, Melanie and I looked and laughed. We're like, we're not going anywhere.
Okay, wait, back up. So yes. So I'm like, if you need some space, we can, and in my mind, I'm like, I just want to get out of here. Right. And he had just been saying, who's in charge, who's in charge, who's in charge. And so I say, like, if you need some space, we can leave. And I see Melanie and Cass look at each other and shake their heads and like make a face. And Cass goes, we're not going anywhere. And she's like, did you say just a note or just a heads up? Oh yeah. Just a heads up. She is not in charge.
I forgot about that. That was funny.
I was like, damn it. Right. Okay. I'm not in charge. And then I'm like, fine, I'm not in charge. That was funny.
So how did you know, Cass, when it was time to be done?
So we had a couple like minor, like little apexes, if you will, a couple little waves. And then honestly, I think it just like it was done. Once he started getting too far back into cognitive and start asking, like he was basically looping through the same story. So part of what I do during these is blow a fuck ton of Kiave energy, which is a Hawaiian shamanism energy that is basically just meant to scratch the track that is playing in your mind. And it's funny because Melanie listened to all of Jade's recordings. Jade obviously was present for all of Jade's recordings. And I listened enough to know that he was going right back into the same story, but like forgetting and like skipping tracks and like missing pieces. So I was like, okay, like he's out of the apex of the medicine, like the crest of the medicine, and he's back almost into cognitive. So it's funny because I hadn't listened to the full tracks, because every time I would do it, something would happen. Amelia needed this, like we had a meeting for this, like I would just keep getting pulled away, and I was like, okay, like I'm clearly not meant to listen to it. I trust spirit, like good for you. So Jade tucked herself into a corner, was coming down. Melanie was like, I think she was laying down at that point, kind of coming down.
Yeah.
And I got to listen and dissect what what they had already heard, but with a different version of it playing in his head. So I was kind of able to then do like live action spot therapy, if you will, like kind of coming down and out.
Yeah.
They could completely tone out, kind of zen out. Jade got to then move her body and make food for us, because all of us were kind of starting to feel the snack urge, because we had been going for probably close to 7-ish hours.
Yeah.
Thereabouts.
And we hadn't eaten a lot. You don't want to eat a lot before ceremony. So everyone was pretty hungry. So yeah, that's my happy place. I could not listen to those same stories over again. And I couldn't at that point. Like I've heard all of these, and also it's a little bit depressing because you're like, oh, we just did all this work and now you're just saying the same stories. But there was, to Cass's point, a reason and a purpose for that. And she was able to respond to those same stories with different words. And I think because of the space he was in.
And I also am happy because like, had I listened to that and then had I gotten regurgitated the same thing, I probably would have shut it down.
Yeah.
And been like, oh, you've already said all this. Like, these are just where like, it would have been a very different conversation versus me listening intently of what string I could kind of pull next. Because it's an unraveling process. So like for me, I'm like looking for the next in or the next string or the next way to like burn something down or the next thing to release. So I could listen kind of with new ears versus had I forced myself to listen to all of the recordings, I would have been probably, laying on the floor, sitting in the corner bored.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
And that was just the second night.
That was just,
you had a whole nother one after that.
We could do a part 3 easily on this, but
so I don't think there's, I think the big thing to say is after the ceremony, what happens is all of the integration pieces is like, okay, now like some of these things and the ways that you're feeling and the things that you learned and the different perspectives, like how are we going to apply this? And that's the process that we start, kind of on day 3 and 4 with most of our clients, but then it's, a couple month long process of like taking, because this is a massive data dump, if you will, like massive, operating system. I'll go geek with it for a second, change and shift. And it takes a while for you to realize all of the things that have been changed, altered, and shifted. So that's
that makes sense because if you're not put in a position to experience a feeling or an emotion or, a physical reaction to something that you used to feel, then how do you know that something's changed? Or how do you know that there's something to be done? So you kind of have to wait until you experience a trigger, if you will, to then know, oh, okay, something's different.
And then years later too, what generally happens is you're like, oh, I would have responded to that, or I would have done this. And now I am unable to, I like to say I'm unable to respond in the same way that I used to, like kind of get stopped. So I think that's the part that, takes the 2 to 3 months so he can start dissecting and kind of playing with that and seeing what that looks like in IRL in real life.
Yeah. And we will be meeting with him, through these next months. So that's part of this ceremony, the integration, which we've talked about before with ayahuasca and how important it is. So it's just as important here, obviously.
Now, one more question for you. Is this something that you would do with the same client again?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, on, I think the day after, he actually started asking about that process and what that would look like. And it's funny when our clients ask about that process, because it's always this dance of like, I know what I just came off of. I know like what it felt like in the moment, but like, I feel like I'm almost called again, but I don't want to be called again type scenario.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this, it's fun little dance, if you will. So we talked about that, and we didn't even get to talk about any past life regression stuff, but when we're talking in this space, I have a tendency to get these, they start out as visions and they're sort of like pictures, and they move to kind of vignettes, which we talked about, and then they move to kind of these videos. So as we're talking about this, I'm getting this vision of his property, of where he's at, and what it looks like, and where we would do ceremony. And I'm calling out like particular features of the property, which again, to kind of Jade's point, he has this thing where he doesn't want to believe, even though he knows it's true.
He doesn't want to believe in, just to put it baldly, the psychic gifts that Cass has been given. And so he, will fight that a little bit. And we can't tell the whole story. I don't want to tell the whole story because I think it would give away a little too much about him personally. But it was so magical to sit and listen. And a couple of times, again, my role was, I was very tapped into him and I was very tapped into Cass, and I could tell that he didn't want to acknowledge or talk about some of the things that Cass was bringing up. And so I could be like, hey, John, did you hear what she just said? She just literally told you exactly where XYZ is in your house, in what room, and she's never been to your house. Like, it's really important that you're hearing this right now. And he's like, rah, rah, rah. There's a lot of that.
I become like a dog with a bone in that case, where like it'll be clear, and then the minute you don't give me like the satisfaction of telling me that it's clear, I will get even more clear visuals. And then I'm like, where your underwear drawer is to the right. Like, come on, like,
yeah, that's
it's like a game of mercy.
Yeah.
Like Cass is gonna keep pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling until you're like, mercy.
And it's completely unintentional. It's just like my picture gets, the more they resist, the more clear I get. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, I saw that many, many times through the days. Yeah, it was pretty great.
It's kind of I don't know. It's a cool game. So
love it.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Is there anything that you guys didn't share that you want to share with the listeners about the experience, or next steps, or anything like that?
I think there needs to be a little micro conversation about like plant medicine with intention and being guided and like journeying in this space versus doing it recreationally.
Mm-hmm.
Jade, if you can lead us in that micro conversation.
It's a very different experience, having done it both ways. I do want to say, though, I think that if any human being is on a journey of healing, even if they think they're using the medicine recreationally, it isn't. It gets work done, right? And it's, it's to a space where, like, for me, it's not something I'm eager to do or even want to do. It's like work. It's going to be work. And I'm okay to do the work, but there's not this like, ooh, this is fun. It's not fun. It's a journey. It's work. A pilgrimage, if you will.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, I feel like there's a certain part of the population that, might use something with, a intention of healing, but when you're being guided, like the guides and the healers can see things that you can see, your blind spots that you necessarily can't see. So I feel like that's a big piece in there too.
Yeah, I want to know what the differences for you, Jade, when you've used recreationally versus when you've used with intention, what that experience is like after and during.
Yeah, that's a little bit hard for me to answer, just because I did get really good work done even when I was doing it recreationally, but I think that's because of the space that I was in my life. I think that I can speak a little bit to other people in my life that have used it recreationally, and it can be more than, it's not really fun. It's scary. It can be a very scary place to be if you're not careful and you're not being guided and you're not safe inside your own mind. It can be very scary. So I think the biggest difference is the guidance, the intention that you set and the guidance that you get to set that intention is your anchor.
So would you say that you didn't see a difference afterwards between when you used it recreationally versus when you used it guided?
That's just because
the results,
because of the place that I was in and the people I was with, the messages that I was getting from the medicine were able to still get through, even though it was fun. But that's not most people's story.
Yeah.
It's just
I'm not allowed to do anything recreational.
I know.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't. Even if I wanted to, it's going to be like, actually, if you're going to try this recreational, your job today is going to be to heal the planet and go.
And don't get me wrong, I know Cass agrees with this. There's levity in it. There's joy in it. There's happiness in it. We laughed so much, so often, so loud. It's not like it's just painful if you're not doing it recreationally. It's just that.
Well, I think that you also are kind of tapping along the lines of the surrender piece too, because like, even if you were doing it recreationally and you surrender, it's not going to be painful. If you are doing it recreational and don't have a sense of that surrender.
Yeah, no, right. Very painful.
It's going to be a different story.
Very true. Yeah. And not everyone's called to use plant medicine either, right? So it's a very individual sort of.
And honestly, with some clients doing the work that we did, if you were, deeply meditative and kind of could get into that space, we can do that work just with essential oils, flower essence, and like non-ethnogenic herbs. So,
yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be other plant-based substances. Right. I just want to end by saying one thing. I only called in 3 spiders during this whole trip.
Only 3?
Only 3. Jade can attest. They were all small. Wow. They were all manageable. No tarantula walked across the floor leisurely, even though I was waiting.
Any cockroaches?
No. Wait, did you have a cockroach? No cockroaches. So just a little daddy long legs and 2 little baby wolf spiders. So I just want to put that out there on record.
That's impressive. That is very impressive.
The whole troop this time.
But how many hawks did you have?
Oh, countless.
Countless hawks. Yeah.
So
you were working in a different space.
Correct. But I was just impressed. I did not fill the house with spiders. So the end.